Okay, so we are the last group. I think we were a singularity maybe because we were very practical in a lot of questions we had, and we had a lot of answer already. We didn't go into too much details on overall issues, but we actually tried to address very specific one. Let's see if this one works. Okay, too much. So that's obviously where we started. We had a team of different people, Rain, Liz, Sulo, Peter, Janne, Alexander, and Jak. And we tried to really engage on a lot of different specific interests that everyone put on the table. So obviously we had a brief that was taking on board some of the guidelines from two different visions, the Main Street and the waterfront vision documents, and try to integrate that with the Streamcity vision, which is our vision for the master plan of the port area. Those are the documents. They're actually laying still on the table the same way, so it's actually our proposal and the other two documents, one on top of the other. And I think that there's been quality in all of them, but also there's been a lot of things that are still in progress in all of these documents. So it was quite fun to see what we could take on board in a very straightforward way. So once again, we were very practical. So we looked into the green corridors and the connection to the cultural kilometre. So how do we activate certain areas, the north portion of the site, across the site, and the new green corridors that is actually one of the topic of the overall planning master plan. So again, we tried to mark up on one of the two vision documents and again bringing back to the third one. So you could actually see that some of the lines are already somehow talking to one another. And those are the things that in a practical way we could start implementing because they're coming from different sources. So that definitely means that there is a certain value to the way they've been approached and studied. Another interesting thing was the accessibility and urban connection. So there are critical areas, Terminal A location. There was an interest about the idea of moving the terminal slightly towards the north to free some of the view corridors from the city tower, let's say, and the old pier. So what was interesting is that we want to create a gate-to-gate connection, which is coming from Terminal A to the gate to the old city, but also a visual connection, which is from the old pier to Kai Street. And that's kind of linking back to the historical idea that Sadama Street was linking back the city to the Harbour area. So that was one of the main things that we literally tried to kind of agree. And we found a lot of agreement in the end. So it's interesting because if you ask us, we're going to have a lot of solution already in place. They might all change, but I think the team had a lot of fun actually agreeing and signing off decisions while we were talking about it. And obviously we had other interesting inputs from the other documents, the connection to the university area, how we could bring in and change the program that we planned in our document by listening to the vision document that was actually highlighting the connection to universities, a different type of users, and at the same time putting together the tramline connections. And again, because we're the practical team, we know already that there is a certain approved scheme and a certain budget for it, so we're going to have to find the money to get the extension to the north part, because we know that there is a limitation on what has been already planned. Some of the new future, we actually got transported in a way, and we started thinking how can we bypass some of the problematic issues that are already on site. How could we actually implement maybe new activators, new attractions, or new sort of interpretation of what the space is now. So we tried to actually analyzing if we could have a ferry connections for the people to actually enjoy the water from the sea. Because at the moment there is a lot of traffic coming from other countries and from from Finland or from the cruise ships, but actually the local public is not really enjoying the seaside from the water itself. So for us it was quite interesting, what if we create a public transportation that is using the waterfront and allows the people to see the city from the water. So somehow we started sketching what should we connect, an opera house location to a landmark tower, to the existing Linna Hall. So that actually is becoming in the next slide something even stronger. So there were a few interesting ideas that we tried to put on the paper, and obviously, because we also had people from the port of Tallinn, we know already that some of them are maybe too unrealistic, some others that might be too controversial, but also we got some really good feedback from them as well. And another interesting idea was, okay, since we're talking about it, how do we bring the opera house back into the scheme? Because I know there's been something that has been on the table for a lot of years, I guess almost, well, too many years. So we started addressing where could we place it. And again, we found four or five different locations. One that is towards the end of the water, on the east side. Another one that is obviously on the north side, but because we don't have ownership on that land in terms of master planning, what we did was actually thinking maybe we could place it in relationship to the Linnahall. So maybe this new element, this new opera house could become something that triggers and help the renovation of the Linnahall, which is one of these historical Congress hall that is a very strong presence on site. And then at a certain point, we started thinking, why don't we place it towards the Admiralty Basin? And that was something that was also in another master plan finalist scheme. And because, again, we are the practical team, we managed to call the manager of the opera house, and he actually confirmed the dimensions, and we know that we can probably fit it on the Admiralty Basin. So we could try to create a new landmark really on the water that can compete with the sort of functional, more industrial nature of the Admiralty Basin itself. And that's actually the proper sketch that shows the dimensioning that we are required to fit the opera house into the center of the development. So again, that's what we just went through. So we also started doing some sort of provocations between one another and see how we could bring those maybe into reality in the future. Well, we started saying, why don't we actually take all the North Port functions and we try to relocate them somewhere else? That would be ideal. But obviously that was, I think, coming from more a real estate or developer point of view. And we didn't get it too far with it. But also we started thinking, what if we start creating bridges for cars? And funny enough, that was actually coming from someone who's working on the new Rady Street project, which is somehow an interesting development of it. But it was, again, something that can link back to the high street vision. So the way that we can use mitigation system to slow down the traffic on Artery Street. And then obviously maybe we can bring that on the other two crossings that are going to be part of the new Rady Street to feed back the city into the area instead of only highlighting the longitudinal direction. So another items, again, quite technical, I guess, was and that was coming mainly from the city planning point of view, is how we can create an extension that is not conflicting with the sort of waterfront promenade and the way that can create a fourth phase of expansion towards the water by preserving still the water park that is on the east side of the city. So again, this was a fairly technical solution. So there is a basic car entrance and there is a straightforward outline of what we can build and what we cannot build. And that was, again, something interesting because it's a very direct answer to a very straightforward problem in a way. One of the last item was the typology studies. And again, we started sketching which scale are we using and which scale are we addressing our first sketch for what could be building typologies. And we noticed that it is obviously a very strong directionality that is going from west to east. And that's given by the urban sort of configuration of the new Rady Street, but it's also given by our idea of having a parallel pedestrian line that is crossing and cutting the building. Now what we're thinking is, what if we actually address it in courtyard typologies versus linear typologies? What if we actually address it with the pedestrian road, which is in between the two sort of functional traffic? What if that becomes a typology of courtyard, which is cut through and is punctured by a pedestrian sort of lively idea of a streetscape? So those are, again, study on sort of alignment and crossing between different flows and different volumes. That it's just, again, a first sketch, but it could be something that we could implement at a later stage when we start addressing real typology of buildings and streetscape. And then the north side interface. Obviously for us, we try to convince the port to actually buy the north plot because we think it's quite important. But we didn't get too far with it. But in a way, what was interesting was that we could still preserve the idea of connecting the edge of the waterfront, even in a way by bypassing the north limitation of the site boundaries and connect it back to the promenade that is linking to the landmark at the end of the breakwater edge. And this is still something that we need to kind of readapt and readjust based on our first concept, but it's still something that somehow can be integrated at this stage with what we have both in the vision of the seafront and both in our Streamcity vision master plan. There is also a sort of any other items slide at the end. How do we address canal water references? Because I know there is a river that has been somehow synced under the new Rady Road, and maybe we should try to bring back some of these in the public realm around this road. How do we activate the basin? And this is something that, again, we kind of agreed after seeing a few reference images of Berlin's on other sort of interesting pool winter saunas that could be placed on temporary pontoons around. So we started having fun actually collecting items that we could place in the basin for a winter activity. I know they're doing some winter dipping sort of performances there at times, but that wasn't too convincing yet. And then we have something that is related to the branding. So phase one identity was something that we tried to name in our report, but in a way it was something that didn't really convince us. And I think that the problem is that it was a generic title for it. We call it the city to the waterfront, but we think that it should be something that is more concentrated on the public activities and the public realm, especially on the basin, as a new center for the city. So those are all items that we try to resolve, and hopefully we'll try to bring most of them in our next refinement of the project. Thanks.